Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. It is exactly 8:34 a.m. South African time, and we're now going to cross the waters. We're going to Osaka, and I presume that's where our guest is based. And that, of course, is you, Professor Saul Takahashi. You are an international human rights and humanitarian lawyer. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the program. And of course, we're going to be talking about the big global story today, and it has to do with the Middle East. Okay, can you hear me, Professor?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Thank you.
A very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning to you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, so days after the US floated an offer in the hopes of reopening negotiations, Iran on Sunday released a response. A peace proposal, of course, focused on ending the war on all fronts, especially Lebanon, where US ally Israel is fighting Iran-backed Hezbollah militants. And of course, Trump has responded, and he is saying that the counter proposal is totally unacceptable. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we really need to start panicking just yet. I mean, of course, Trump is always full of bluster and bravado, and he's full of, strong language all the time. So, I'm not sure we really need to start panicking and thinking that, the attacks are going to resume, tomorrow. I'm not really sure about that. But, of course, it's always very unpredictable. But it is a positive thing that at least these proposals are going back and forth. We don't really know exactly what is contained in them. But, I mean, certainly judging from Trump's statements and from his general demeanor and from, just looking at how he's conducted himself up till now in pretty much every single forum. I mean, the thing is, the real problem is that Donald Trump is not interested in negotiating. He doesn't know. I honestly don't think he knows how to negotiate. The Art of the Deal, which was, of course, the title of that book in the 80s, it really is. It's a misnomer because he doesn't know how to deal. He bullies, he intimidates, he cajoles people into subjugation and surrender. And, unfortunately, quite often it's worked. He sees something he wants, he has a tantrum until he gets it. And I think, that's probably what's been going on with Iran. I mean, you can bet that that's what's going on with Iran. I don't think he understands what it means to meet the Iranians halfway, so to speak. So I think, that's really what the problem is here. And of course, the big wild card, the big unpredictable is, what are the Israelis going to do? I mean, it's very predictable. They don't want any kind of peace terms. They want this war to be fought to the last American. And, if they will do their utmost, they have been doing their utmost to sabotage all the peace efforts. That's why the attacks keep on going on in Lebanon. They know that this is a line that, the Iranians it makes it very difficult for them to give way on. So that's a big wild card. And we very much have to hope that, Trump is going to, well, we very much have to hope that things will not go down the wrong path. Let's put it that way.
And sadly, the moment Trump sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold.
Yes.
And despite, our feelings about his narcissistic approach to the world, he clearly does seem to believe that he's Lord of the world. But be that as it may, it's still having a huge impact on oil prices. I mean, it's jumped more than $4 a barrel following news of the continued stalemate that leaves the narrow Strait of Hormuz largely closed. So here he's having his moments, like a child, having a tantrum, and the rest of the globe is suffering the consequences.
Yeah, that's for sure. Certainly where I'm living in Japan, we're seeing the consequences. And of course, in other countries in this region in particular, and also in Africa, countries that have less resources in terms of financial resources to act as a buffer, of course, it's much, much worse. And this is the real issue here. I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of commentary and a lot of talk about how the price of petrol is going up in the United States, and that's acting as a lot of pressure on Donald Trump and et cetera. And it's certainly acting as pressure on Republican congressmen. I mean, I think they're really feeling the heat, and they're doing their best to try to push things into a proper direction. But I honestly don't think Trump really cares. I think he just thinks that he's going to bully and intimidate the Iranians into surrender, and then everybody is going to jump up and down with their hands in the air and recognize what a wonderful, dear leader he is. I honestly don't think he cares. And about elections, the midterm elections are coming up, and again, many of the Republican congressmen are really feeling the pressure for this. But I just don't think, Donald Trump has shown us time and time again that he doesn't accept the results of the elections that he doesn't like. And I honestly don't think, I think he's going to do the same here. What that is going to mean in practical terms for democracy and civil order in the United States, that's something that we have to see. But, I just don't think that kind of pressure is really, it's really factoring in on him right now. What is factoring in is his obsession with not being seen as a loser. That's really what the most important thing is here. He's, he, for all his faults, and there are many, he's not stupid. He realizes, and he certainly realized at a very early stage, that he had been tricked into this by the Israelis. And I honestly think he's pretty angry about that. But he's not going to deal with that. He's not going to do anything to Netanyahu until he finishes with Iran, and he finishes with this whole file in a way that makes him look like a winner, and that he can honestly believe that he won. But I just don't see how that's going to happen. I mean, this is going to be a really difficult mountain to overcome. So, we're really stuck in this stalemate, and I fear it could last a bit longer.
Sure, Professor. Let's go back to Tehran. As part of the peace deal, what they have included was a demand for compensation of war damage, and obviously to rebuild the infrastructure in Iran. And also no further tax is one of the other points that they have raised. And then, of course, the all-important issue is lifting of sanctions and end a U.S. ban on the Iranian oil sales. So that, as far as Trump is concerned, is a huge order, tall order, but it's a very reasonable list of demands as far as the Iranians are concerned. However, a while ago, when the war had just started, there were talks about the rebuilding. We know, let's just go a little back and talk about the Palestinian issue. The genocidal war on the Palestinian people, and is still ongoing. Trump had made a statement that he will expect the Arab neighbors in the Middle East to rebuild Palestine. Never mind that Israel had bombed Gaza to smithereens. This is a really tall order that the Arab neighbors should be rebuilding Palestine. Do you think that he'll respond with similar sentiments, saying and suggesting that, UAE and Saudi Arabia should fund the rebuilding of Iranian infrastructure as well?
Well, I kind of doubt that that's even a quasi-realistic prospect in the case of Iran, and I think I mean for sure most of the Gulf countries would just scoff at that notion, and I really don't think that would happen. But I think it points to a broader question which you're asking, but certainly in the case of Gaza, because this isn't the first time. I mean, time and time again since 2000 and the end of the Operation Cast Lead was late 2008, early 2009, and that was the first major Israeli offensive against Gaza ever since the elections and the split between Gaza and the West Bank. So, again, they've been going in, every now and then, quote unquote, mowing the lawn, which is what they call it. the dehumanization of Palestinians and the normalization in their minds of military operations where they just massacre women and children left and right. That has led to this kind of terminology being used by the Israelis. But they do this, and then they kill thousands of people, and they destroy God knows how many homes and buildings, and then we look to the quote unquote international community, the donor countries, which means basically like my country, most of the Western countries, to fund the rebuilding. The Israelis have never paid for any of this, and this is completely outrageous. They're the ones who have, done all of this destruction in blatant violation of any kind of international legal or moral norm. So they should be the ones who pay for it. There's no question about that. So, in terms of Gaza, yeah, of course, Trump obviously would be announcing that he's looking to the UAE and to the Saudis and to the Gulf states in general to rebuild, and the politics of that are, something that's certainly back in his mind with that kind of demand. But it's something which has been going on and on. With Iran, the politics are completely different, and I completely don't see that happening unless there is a big, major league surrender on the part of the Iranians, which is certainly not going to happen. But honestly, I think the demand for reparations is, of course, completely reasonable, completely justified. But let's face it, I think the chances of it happening are slim. But I think it's just part of the whole package of economic relief that the Iranians are demanding, and probably they're figuring that that can be one demand, a maximalist demand, that they sort of walk back a little bit later if they get some of the other things which may be more realistic, and that's sanctions relief and also a release of the funds that the US and the West have frozen for these years.
Let me wrap up with this final question, rather two questions. Clearly, the US is going to put pressure on Iran to stop the uranium enrichment program. And then I'm also wondering, why is Trump leaning on China to use its influence to push Tehran to make a deal with Washington?
Well, Trump is trying to lean on China to use its leverage with Iran, because it basically that's admitting that it can't do it itself. All of these fancy weapons and these aircraft carriers and these fighter planes and everything that the US have used, this is a very blunt instrument, and it hasn't worked, and it's not going to work. And that's why Trump is, sort of running to the Chinese with his tail between his legs, saying, please, please help us out. In the same way that when the Iranians closed down the Strait of Hormuz, which of course was very, very predictable. Everybody with any brains knew that that's what they were going to do. And they had announced that they were going to do it. But, Trump just seems not to have given that any thought. But so when they closed Hormuz, all of a sudden, the first thing out of Trump's mouth is, it's the Europeans that benefit from Hormuz, so they should be the ones that patrol. It's basically, it really is geopolitically, strategically, for the United States, this entire thing has been a complete fiasco. It's been a dumpster fire. The U.S. has shown that it's been, it's basically incapable of forcing, so far at least, Iran to bend to its will. It's basically admitted that it doesn't have even the military prowess to do these, to do these kind of things. And it's also admitted that it doesn't have the diplomatic wherewithal, leverage, or just competence to try to really negotiate with the Iranians. I'm not a big fan. In many ways, I'm not a big fan of Barack Obama, and I think he did a lot of things which were really terrible, certainly in terms of foreign policy in the Middle East. But one thing you have to say is that he negotiated with the Iranians, and he was patient, and he did it, and he came up with this deal, which was, reasonable for all parties concerned, and which was being implemented by the Iranians, so as far as we can tell, in good faith. And and Trump tore up that agreement, and now he's having trouble getting anything which may be half as good. So this really has been strategically, it's been a complete dumpster fire for the United States, and just another nail in the coffin of Pax Americana, an American hegemony everywhere. And the U.S. allies, my country included, Japan, but of course the Europeans and allies everywhere, they've obviously been looking with great trepidation at what Trump has been doing, not just in terms of Iran, but ever since he came into office. And countries are hedging their bets. Countries are realizing that the U.S. is no longer a reliable partner, and that is going to have very serious implications.
Professor, thank you. That's where we leave it. Professor Saul Takahashi, based in Osaka, Japan. He is an international human rights and humanitarian lawyer. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much.
God bless.